Montana Constitution, past and present. I'm Dave Peppinger, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of the City Club Missoula's Board of Directors. Thank you all for being here today. City Club's mission is to bring people together to inform and inspire them on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when discussing challenging issues. Before getting into the forum, let me give some sincere thank yous. Thank you to Missoula Community Access Television, which records all of our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190. MCAT occasionally live streams our forums on its local live platform as well. You can also find videos of past CCM forums by clicking on the video button on our webpage, cityclubmissoula.com. Now, a special thank you to our sponsors. Those at the executive level, they are Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners at helping to expand audience access and reliability planning and conducting our forums. So thank you very much. We're also grateful to all of our other sponsors as well as membership. And we invite you to join if you're not a member. And of course, thanks to our board of directors who tirelessly go after all of these forums and bring this together. And most importantly, Yenny Rohrbach, our executive assistant. So, our speakers for today's panel are Mae Nan Ellingson, former delegate to 1972 Constitutional Convention, and Representative Wayne Rusk of Corvallis. Unfortunately, former State Senator Mary Sheehy Moe was supposed to be here but unable to attend. Mae Nan Ellingson was the youngest delegate to serve in the Constitutional Convention and is one of 7 remaining of the 100 delegates. She was elected as a 24-year-old UM grad student. After the convention, she graduated from the UM Law School in 1976, served as deputy city attorney for the city of Missoula for 6 years before joining Dorsey and Whitney, where for 30 years she served as a bond counsel for the state of Montana, many of its agencies and 2 cities, counties, and school districts throughout the state. She has been active in state and local government and civic and philanthropic affairs. She counts her efforts towards the new public library, her involvement in the Missoula Art Museum and Five Valleys Land Trust as labors of love that have made a difference in the Missoula community. She was recently awarded an honorary doctorate of humane letters for her beloved university, from her beloved University of Montana. An honor in which she is immensely grateful. She's lived in Missoula since the fall of 1967, where she and her former husband, John Ellingson, raised 2 sons. Representative Wayne Rusk is a 30-year resident of Ravalli County. He spent some years as a pilot in local commercial aviation and has since worked as self-employed tradesman. Rusk is chair of the Ravalli County Collaborative and on the board of Ravalli County Economic Development Authority. He is married and has 2 children. After the last several years' involvement in local politics and at the committee level, Rusk ran in the competitive primary for House District 88. He went on to serve his first term in the 68th legislature last year as a member of both the House Judiciary and Health and Human Services committees. He's currently running for the Senate District 44 in Ravalli County. With all that, Mae Nan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, City Club, for move the mic up, here, down, closer to my mouth. Okay, I'll start over. Thank you, City Club, for doing this special meeting on the Constitution of Montana from 1972 and for inviting me to participate. I am really sorry that Mary Moe could not be here. Obviously, she's someone who has, still not right. Huh. Okay, all right, great, thank you. Mary Moe is an active state and community leader, and her presence will be missed, but I understand that her recorded remarks may be distributed to all of you who are in attendance. And I'm super happy to meet Representative Rusk. During this last legislative session, there were several people who said to me, "You really need to meet Wayne Rusk," and it never happened because he was so busy, so it's a pleasure meeting you today. So here we go. I wanted to start out by telling you what the Montana Constitution is not. It is not a Democratic or a Republican document. Even though we delegates ran as partisans, I was a Republican elected from Missoula. There were 58 Democrats, 36 Republicans, and 6 independents. The parties, neither party took any position with respect to what should be in the Constitution. There were no caucuses during the convention. The delegates all sat in alphabetical order, not on opposing sides of the aisles, because there was no opposing side of the aisle. All 100 delegates who were elected believed in 3 things. They believed in self-government, they believed in the state of Montana, and they believed in the power of government to do the citizens' work. This convention came about because a bipartisan group of legislators and citizens looked at the 1889 Constitution and found it sorely in need of revision. A Republican-controlled legislature in 1970 submitted to the voters of the state the question of whether to call a constitutional convention, and the voters overwhelmingly approved the call of a convention. And so in the fall of 1971, 100 delegates were elected from across the state to write the state constitution. It was a constitutional convention that was quite unlike legislative sessions in that it was totally open to the public. Every meeting was public. Every vote was recorded. Any lobbyist had to register and had to register what they spent. That had never happened in the Montana legislature. We opened every committee hearing to the public. We took citizens' comments and suggestions for the Constitution. It was probably the most democratic, and I mean that with a little d, undertaking in this state's history. Let me tell you what is in that Constitution that I think is so significant. Separate and apart from the preamble, which is very special, and if you'll indulge me, I think I'll read it, primarily in honor of my friend and delegate Bob Campbell, who died 2 months before our 50th anniversary celebration of the Constitution. We, the people of Montana, grateful to God for the quiet beauty of our state, the grandeur of our mountains, the vastness of our rolling plains, and desiring to improve the quality of life, equality of opportunity, and to secure the blessings of liberty for this and future generations, do ordain and establish this Constitution. At the end of our deliberations, all 100 delegates signed the Constitution. And I think it was an incredible show of unanimity and commitment that all 100 delegates were able to do that. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute, about the approval process of the Constitution and how very close that was, and perhaps why. But let's turn to what I think are the key provisions of the Constitution. First of all is the Declaration of Rights. Like the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Rights is a limitation on the power of government. So this Constitution gives power to the three branches of government. It reserves power to the people, and it has the most comprehensive Bill of Rights of any state constitution, and more superior than the federal Constitution. There are 35 rights guaranteed to Montana citizens in this Constitution. Every one that was in the 1889 Constitution, but substantially more. Because of the importance of that Bill of Rights, I'm going to come back to that too if I don't run out of time, and I hope I won't run out of time. But very quickly, the big key things that needed changing in our 1889 Constitution was making government more transparent. So the right to know what your government's doing and the right to participate are so embedded in this Constitution. They are throughout this Constitution. The other thing that is so significant is that we believed in the people to govern themselves and to enact laws on their own through the initiative process, and to enact amendments to the Constitution through the initiative process. And probably most importantly, we realized that what we did may not be perfect, and so we wrote into the Constitution every 20 years the citizens of Montana have an opportunity to decide whether or not they would like to call for another constitutional convention. That election will occur again in 2030. One occurred in 1990, in which the voters overwhelmingly said no. It occurred again in 2010. It was a closer vote, but still by a significant majority, the voters said no in 2010. But that will be on the ballot in 2030. In addition to making government more open, there was a significant effort to make government more fair. And by that, I mean when we say in the preamble, assure the equality of opportunity, the first place we did that was in the educational article. You may not realize, but prior to the Constitution, there was a discrepancy in the amount of money being spent in the state on schools for school children. It could range from $16,000 per student in Colstrip and $2,000 in Florence, because it was primarily a local effort that supported schools, and it was based on local property tax base. The Constitution said it's the state's obligation, not the local government's obligation, not the local school district's obligation, to provide an equal educational opportunity for all. And the state was mandated for the first time to provide a free, public, quality education and to distribute revenues equally among school districts. That has been huge and important, and it took several years of litigation in order to achieve what that meant, because the legislature kept failing to fully fund our basic school program. Another area that kind of parallels that I think is so significant of a change, prior to 1972, property tax valuations and assessments were done by local elected county assessors. There was a huge discrepancy across the state between the values, the assigned values for property. There are communities where anecdotally it was clear that a property owner knew the assessor and their property tax value was significantly less than perhaps their neighbors. Significant discrepancy across the state in valuation of property tax. The Constitution changed that and required the state to equalize. The state Department of Revenue would appraise and equalize property tax values across the state. That's it. I have 2 minutes, or I've covered half my time.
Mr. Rusk, if you would like to go.
Okay, I'm in a hurry. I may not get, well, there's going to be questions, so hopefully I'll get to some of those things. Oh, God, there's so much to say and learn about this Constitution. I guess what I really want to point out, because there's so much conflict right now, I think, between the branches of government. Let me just say, one of the biggest priorities of the convention was to make the legislative branch stronger. I was on the legislative committee. Our legislature was the weakest branch of government, even though it was the one closest to the people. So that it could not have interim committee work. I mean, they had 60 days every other year to do the state's business, and they were done. So we have annual sessions. We authorized interim committee work, and we set up single-member districts. And it was really an empowered branch of government that we felt could be equal to the other two branches of government. With respect to the governors, or the executive branch, we did try to strengthen the executive branch, make it more accountable. Prior to the Constitution, there were so many boards and independent agencies, all appointed in very different ways, and there was no accountability. So we changed that and put all of those agencies under the executive branch with the appointment by the governor. And I think really significantly, we made the governor and lieutenant governor run on the same ticket. Prior to that, you could have a Democratic lieutenant governor, Republican governor. They each ran separately, and we required them to run together. We made huge changes in local government, and I'm hoping I'm going to get a question about that. And I'm hoping I'll get a question about the Bill of Rights, or that we will get a question about them. But I want to say one quick thing about the Supreme Court. We didn't do one thing to the Supreme Court. We didn't give it any more powers. The Supreme Court's role now is the same as the Supreme Court's role in 1889. It's the same as the role of the Supreme Court under the U.S. Constitution. So at the end of the day, what this Constitution did was created not anything breathtaking with respect to three separate but equal branches of government, each designed to check and balance one another. Okay, Dave. Time's up. I see that. Okay.
That on? Thank you for having me here today. It's a great honor to be on a panel with a distinguished member of the constitutional delegation of our state from 72. And if you had told me I would be on this stage today a week ago, I would not have believed you. In fact, a little bit of the input I had was that I was going to be like Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. To which I replied that was an opportunity that I was willing to take because I believed that the classical conservatism that I ran on and to which I subscribe trades easily with our neighbors and passes effortlessly through party lines on many occasions. And so this is a real honor to get to address you. Mae Nan's right. We tried to meet on 2 or 3 occasions. I was pulled by my sleeve through a big crowd in the rotunda twice in hopes of meeting her, and there was and we didn't meet up. But it's an honor today to be here with her. Wish Mary could have made it as well. It's well known that we had a supermajority in the legislature this time, and as time went on, I got to thinking that supermajorities are kind of like winning the lottery. When you're going down to get your ticket, it sounds like a great idea, and you've got all the money earmarked. And as we know, sometimes when people actually win the lottery, it doesn't quite go the way they had it in their mind. So, but that's the way the numbers were arrayed in our legislature, and of course, with that comes the opportunity to make the most of that for the ideas to which we subscribe. But an imbalance like that in a system of government like ours, government by the people, can be a liability in spots as surely as it's an asset. And it's hard to manage, and we found all those things out. In particular, when it came to constitutional amendments with the higher bar, which it takes the 2/3 to amend, and I'll get to that in a moment, what the significance of that is and was, and how it informed some of the decisions that I made in regards to those amendments. But that was a spot where we had a lot of interest, and a lot of amendments came through the legislature. I was looking, I think there were 19 that made it through into the House and Senate, and some were tabled, some were withdrawn. By tabled, it means it got to committee, but it was decided that it wasn't going to leave committee. And then there were 6 that I saw that came through the House that made it to the floor, and those were the decisions that had to be made as to whether or not those were going to pass on to the people. And they were not easy decisions. I was in Judiciary Committee where I heard the arguments in full for these proposals. There's 20 people on Judiciary, 80 in the House, so I had some information on those proposals from the testimony for and against that others didn't have. And I went through that, went back through it, and some of them were lengthy. And there were problems in spots. They were good ideas in some senses, but they may or may not achieve the ends for which they were drafted. And I'm not going to go into what the particulars of that were, but I had some concerns. Other people had concerns. There were lobbies for and against, and I could see the decision looming, and was going to have to make a decision. But while that was happening, another argument came to my mind, another principle, as I thought about why is it that in both our federal constitution and our state constitution that the bar is made higher for this governing document to change it, the 2/3 rather than the simple majority that it takes to pass legislation. And as I thought about that, it occurred to me that the only reason that that could be, politically speaking, for the most part, was that the founders knew that somewhere between a simple majority and a supermajority, which would be 51 and 68 respectively, partisanship and factions would play themselves out. And when it came to a governing document, they wanted consensus because we're all under that. And that's where our rights are housed, or in our constitutions, and the high bar was meant for those reasons. And so I looked at the landscape, and we had the numbers numerically to pass this legislation if we stayed together and if these were solid proposals. But it occurred to me that we didn't have what I will for a moment call the spirit of the law met, which was to transcend partisanship and faction with consensus, which is what you want. A good example would be the amendment from last session, Constitutional Amendment 48, where persons and papers and effects were amended to be our computers and our phones we all carry now, and for obvious reasons. An amendment to a constitution should almost be self-evident. So we had the numbers and we had the letter of the law met, so to speak, but for some reason we didn't have the spirit of the law met in the sense that we were unilaterally ready to make these changes. And so between what I saw as some amendments that really were not going to add or detract, in some cases I feel like they would have detracted, and certainly not add, combined with the larger argument that the spirit of the law was not met, I elected out of deference for that to vote no on those amendments. And I want to state at the outset that that is no disparagement of any kind to the leadership or to my colleagues who saw things otherwise. I respect their decisions, and I hope that they respect mine in that regard. I think that the difference was that I went and looked at the larger argument, the more constitutional principle, I'll call it, that the intent of the law should stay with the letter of the law. And when I saw that discrepancy and all other things being equal, I made the decisions that I made. So that's where things stood. None of them passed. I didn't vote for any of them in the end, and none of them made it out to the people. I'll address one other argument that I've heard, and that is, well, let the people decide. That was one of the arguments that was used against the decisions that I made. Excuse me. The people decided in their constitution that the legislature should use their judgment in regards to a constitutional amendment. That's something that precedes the people voting on the measure at large. Also, these measures were created by the legislature, so they weren't necessarily, the origins of them were not initiative-like. They were created and drafted in the legislature itself. And the way I understand the job of the representative is that I'm being hired for my conservative judgment as surely as I'm being hired for my conservative principles. And this was a judgment call. I'm a pilot, or I used to fly quite a bit, and invariably when there is an accident in aviation, it is not so much aptitude that is the problem, it's usually judgment. It's weather, it's understanding what that aircraft will do, and in politics, it's understanding what this principle will do or not do. And so that's where that judgment came in my estimation. Not everyone agrees with me, and I respect that as well. I wouldn't expect that. But one thing I thought I would bring to the table today for your encouragement, if possible, is I want to take a look at this principle in the hands and in the heart of a far larger man than myself, by whom I mean Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. When he had been elected in 1860, and he left Springfield, and he said that the task that rested on him was greater than the task that rested upon Washington, who was our first president and got the thing underway. And he was right. And as people came to him one day, many people came to him with advice, and the South began to secede, and it was obvious that people didn't think that he could keep this nation together. And I want to show you the principle with which he kept it together. A man came in and gave him some advice, and he listened intently to it, and he replied, "No single party could sustain him. He must rely on the great masses of the people, and he would try to pursue such a course as would secure their support." What he was saying here is that the sacred right of self-government belongs to the people and not to the parties. And this is the principle with which he kept our nation together in its darkest hour. And it's also the principle that we can use to draw ourselves back together today. It's the principle that, as a classical conservative, I'll use the term in that sense for the moment, that I ran on and that informed the votes that I took in the legislature, especially in regards to our Constitution, and some others I took in regards to our institutions, by which I mean our judiciary and some other things. And so there's value here to understand that those principles are native to both parties when we stay with our classical ideas. Sometimes we misunderstand conservatism, and I'll call it classical liberalism for a moment. I don't know what other terms to use that aren't politically charged here to work with these larger ideas. Okay. Liberalism and conservatism are not poles to be reached. They're centers to be maintained. They're part and parcel of one another. They're separate but inseparable, and they bear the same relation to one another as do liberty and our Constitution, or law and order. They're separate but inseparable. No law without liberty, no liberty without law. So if we could turn that around in our minds like you would turn two magnets around that are repelling one another, they would come back together on their own largely when we understand that the fundamentals, when I say conservatism, I mean the fundamentals, the rule of law, the separation of powers, the common ground, not the compromise ground. And that's not to make light of our differences. I don't mean to do that. What I do mean to do is to put them in the second place and start here and then work there. So that's how some of this played out in the legislature, and it's, again, an honor to be here and have the opportunity to visit with you.
All right, everyone can recite what they just went over, right? So now we begin the table talk discussion. So for some of you who have the experience, you understand it. For those that are new to City Club, table talk is a very rich part of what we do. So at every table, we have a general discussion about the topic, introduce yourselves, we will have 2 people walking around with microphones. We did send out surveys earlier this year. One of the number one things discussed was the person asking a question at the table tends to have long, drawn-out statements. So, with that said, we will reiterate again, when it comes to your table, please raise your hand, clearly state your name, and then try and get right to the question as quickly as possible. Obviously, we understand context has to be part of it, but it doesn't have to be an autobiography. Okay? So please get right to your question as soon as possible, and we will re-adjourn here at 10 or at 12:30. So thank you. So as I said at the beginning, we're committed to civil discourse. So we ask that you keep your questions respectful and that you avoid making statements. Remember, no autobiographies. Okay? As you can see from the attendance, we've got a large number of guests who'd like to ask questions. So please get to your question quickly as possible. We also ask any members of the media save their questions until the end of the forum. I'm sure our panelists will be happy to stick around for a few minutes. When asking your questions, please be sure to stand up, state your name clearly, avoid statements, and ask one question. We have 2 people with the microphones that will be coming around, Sarah and Eric. They'll have the microphones. They'll come up to you. Whoever, make sure that you've got one person designated at your table to ask your question, and we'll get back at it. So I'll be back shortly. So.
Oh, thank you. My name is Sean Bellabradic, and I'm curious, given 52 years of hindsight, what you think should have been added into the Constitution in 1972 that you didn't get to then?
There's only one thing that I wish we had done differently, and that is I wish that we had put in the Constitution the Judicial Nominating Committee. We were very interested in trying to have merit selection of judges instead of, we have election of judges, but most judgeships are appointed through vacancy. And we made reference to a judicial nominating committee to be established by the legislature. And I wish that we had not done that, because the legislature in this last session really gutted merit-based selection of judges. So I really regret that, not being in the Constitution. I hope somebody will ask what has been put in there that I don't like, but.
I'm not totally familiar with the piece that you're visiting about there, so I'm gonna let Mae Nan answer that. 1, 2, 1, 2. So.
Hello, my name's Frank Reed. Our table would like to have about a 3-hour tutorial from Mae Nan on the Constitution. But one question that came up was if you discussed and how you envisioned the role of finance in government, either for campaign or in how money influences government and how the 3 branches of government might interact with that, but mainly the role of finance. Thank you.
Well, interestingly enough, that did not come up at all in terms of what we have now seen. At that point, Montana had one of the strictest campaign election laws in the United States, and it continued until after Citizens United was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. And our law actually, Steve Bullock's administration defended it all the way to the Supreme Court, but it was stricken on the basis of Citizens United. I feel pretty sure that as a constitutional matter, we really would not have attempted to regulate in that area, think it get more appropriate for the legislature to regulate. Again, it's important to think the purpose of a constitution is to establish these general, widely accepted principles of government which carry through beyond legislative sessions. So we did not deal with that, but again, Montana was a state that was really influenced from the 1889 Constitution all the way through the 60s by corporate domination and corporate influence. There's a quote, it's a little off-key, but I think it's really important to this whole conversation and why this Constitution was so needed. In writing for Inside USA in 1947, an author named John Gunther said, "Anaconda, a company aptly named, has a constrictor-like grip on much that goes on, and Montana is the nearest thing to a colony of any American state." And then let me read you something 10 years later from The Economist. It says, Montana newspaper readers are worse informed about their own affairs than the inhabitants of almost every other state. Think about that. That these national newspapers were talking about our government and the control that we had had up until that time by the corporate powers who actually had written the 1889 Constitution solely for the purpose of statehood. They did not like the control being implemented on them by the federal government as a territory. And if they got their own constitution, or we got our own constitution through statehood, we would have much less interference from the federal government. That's what compelled our 1889 Constitution. They were not interested in creating a document that worked for the state of Montana. They were interested in creating a document that worked for them. It's a long answer to your question, but thank you for the question.
I think your question had to do with finance in government, if I remember correctly, and just another direction to take that. The one thing we do have to do in the legislature is pass a balanced budget. So we are fiscally restrained by the Constitution so to do. It's the only thing that's mandated that we do. The rest is the biannual tune-up that the machinery of government comes in for, and we close the hood on it May 1st and hope it'll run until the next session.
Okay. My name is Jeff Badnock. I wanted to ask a question regarding local government. The Constitutional Convention Local Government Committee was chaired by Lucille Spear, who was a Missoulian. Can you talk about the aspirations that the Constitutional Convention had for local government?
Good question. And yes, Lucille Spear, she was the oldest delegate at age 73 from Missoula, retired documents librarian, and local government was her passion. And under our old Constitution, local governments were very limited in what they could do. They could only do things that were authorized by the legislature. Our Constitution reversed that to some extent. It, one, gave counties legislative power, which they had not had prior to 72. It authorized home rule entities so that basically local citizens could create their own constitution for their cities or their counties. And it requires that citizens get a chance to do that every 10 years. So this election cycle, Missoula voters will be presented, both city and county, with the option of looking at whether they want to study their current form of local government or not. And then if they do, then there will be election for local government study commissions. I will say, unequivocally, I've been very disappointed in the legislature implementing the local government article. They have the Constitution basically says if you do a local government charter, the citizens can grant the charter, the governing body, any of those powers that are not denied by the legislature. The legislature has denied so many powers to local governments, and it really should change. And to me, one of the worst examples is in taxation. I mean, both the governor and I think to some extent legislators blame local governments for property tax problems, when in fact the legislature has refused to give local governments any options other than the property tax. And so but they unfortunately shift the blame. So I think in summary, the promise of the Constitution and the hope of the Constitution with respect to local government has not been fulfilled.
That, just to tag on to the relationship between the state government and the local government, I think the term constitutionally is subsidiary, where the doctrine is that the problems are best solved at the local, closest to the people. Now that has exceptions to it, and it has clauses in it, but generally speaking, that's the intent, and for that reason. So when we go to solve our tax problems, we have to make sure that the state doesn't get between the people and their local elected officials, because the consent of the governed is the overriding principle here. And these other exigencies have to be indexed to those things. We had this debate in the legislature. There's a couple bills in particular that I saw as an imposition to local government. And while I understand our woes tax-wise and housing-wise, I would rather be more deliberate and as a freshman legislator, quite frankly, not so presumptuous as to think that sea change of that magnitude is something that I would subscribe to without having more information.
Hi, my name is Danica Nelson, and our table would like to know how are newly elected legislators educated on the Constitution and its development, specifically with regards to the 1972 delegation and its goals?
Oh, I guess I'll field that one. We have a rigorous program of orientation as legislators, and it was very good. I'll say that right off. I think both parties afford their new legislators that. In particular, as to the Constitution, I did that on my own. I picked this book up. I'd already read it a time or two, and I read it before I got there so that I had those things fresh in my mind and understood how those broad principles work with the three branches, the particular branch that I was elected to, the legislative, and And again, that's where some of that larger picture, I think, came from when I had to make some of the most important decisions I feel like I made in the legislature, was by recognizing not only what was here, but why was it here. Constitutions are sometimes thought to be the province of foundations and mysterious documents. Some people even think they're inspired documents. Constitutions are best understood by their preambles, what they're meant to do, and that's how we know if they're doing their job. Grateful to God. I mean, this is a beautiful preamble that my fellow panelists here wrote, and I have enjoyed those blessings of liberty in this state for 30 years. And that principle of the high bar on the Constitution and the majority bar, that's a constitutional principle, and I took it upon myself. I took pains to know those things before I went to represent my district.
Dave, you said each party provides education for their members. Is it done by parties and not by legislative council or some more nonpartisan organization?
I'm trying to remember who all was at orientation. It's been a while ago, and it's mostly procedures. There's so much to learn about just the job itself that most of the time is spent there. They expect, I think, us to have done our homework on some of the other issues, and of course legislative staff is ultimately who helps draft the bills and determines constitutionality and things like that when it comes to particular legislation. So there is an adequate orientation, but some of these larger principles in a citizen legislature, it's like John Winthrop said when he was governor of Massachusetts Bay, I think is what he was. He said, we run the hazard of our legislators' abilities, but we can hold them accountable to their oath. And so that's kind of what a citizen legislature is. You get who you get, and we get good people. I don't mean to make it sound otherwise, but they bring what they bring, and we keep them faithful to this document with the oath to preserve, protect, and defend. That's what government by the people issues in.
No, I'll look. My name is John Ellingson, and at the risk of stating the obvious, I know one of these remarkable individuals very well, and I'm happy to say that. Our table was interested in what might happen in 2030. Is either one of you or are both of you concerned about placing this issue of having another constitutional convention in after the vote in 2030? And if you are concerned about it, what kinds of measures do you think we should take to make sure that the uniquely wonderful things about this Constitution are protected?
I'll go first, okay? Well, I believe in the process. We wrote it in, and I believe in the process. So here's what I am not really worried about what the people might do. The people approved this Constitution. It's their Constitution. And if they want to have another constitutional convention, then I applaud them and hope they get really good delegates. There are a couple of things I'm worry about. We have become much more partisan, as everybody knows, much more divided. And I fear that right now there is a lack of understanding about what a constitution is supposed to do. So what I think we have to do, and I have helped found an organization called Friends of the Constitution, and our goal over the next 10 years is to educate people, or I guess now it's only 6 years, to educate people about this Constitution, about what's in it, about what's valuable in it. My own sense right now is that an overwhelming majority of people, Montana citizens, still support this Constitution. The latest polls have indicated that. There are a lot of people who still don't fully understand it because this is, some of us who participated still, think it's pretty recent history, but it's not recent history. There's all kinds of new generations that don't know about this Constitution. So I think education is the key over this next 6 years, and then ultimately trusting the people of Montana to make the right decision.
I would concur in that conclusion, that the people are, the consent of the governed governs the Constitution by way of the framework, in this case, of a 30-year, 20-year check upon that document itself. And that's something that we live good lives, and under that Constitution, it's been in place for 50 years. It's subject to the federal Constitution. In other words, it's just sized for our particular geographics and our needs and our people. And as we've seen these amendments come forward, many of them, they have ultimately been found wanting. And what that says is, and part of the stability of a Constitution, part of the power of it is its stability, and its stability is maintained by the high bar to amend it. So when we see these amendments come, when we see them not pass muster, we recognize that the document is sound enough for us to live the good lives that we live and make the adjustments legislatively where possible, and when those issues are according to the legislative nature. If they're privileges, they're governed and protected by the legislature. If they're rights, they're housed in constitutions and further protected above by the federal Constitution. So the less amendment, the better the document. And if you look at our federal Constitution, for instance, why was it amended? Most of them were augmentations of liberty as our country grew, as that perfect union and the blessings of liberty opened upon the freeing the slaves and women's suffrage. And those are amendments that are self-evident. They issue in those rights being secured, and the document stays stable, which is its crowning trait.
Let me comment on this issue and tie it in with something this table over here spoke about. Some people have noted that perhaps our Constitution is too easily amended. And there are at least two examples I will give where I've been disappointed in the amendment of our Constitution. One of them probably has to do with whether special interest groups get involved. We have something in our Constitution now, and I probably will offend some realtors out here, but the Montana Association of Realtors took it upon themselves to amend our Constitution to prohibit a realty transfer tax. Totally self-serving constitutional provision. Most states that have realty transfer taxes use that money to assist with affordable housing. They took away from the legislature a taxing tool that could have been and would be very useful. Self-serving provisions of the Constitution I don't like, and it's hard for a group of citizens to combat a campaign referendum on something like that when the Realtors Association has a tremendous access to money. The other constitutional amendment that I'm very ashamed of, interestingly enough, the people who drafted the amendment, they didn't put it in the Bill of Rights. but it's an infringement on the Bill of Rights, and to my way of thinking, they put it under the general government provision. And many of you may not know it, but same-sex marriage is unconstitutional in the state of Montana. By an amendment to this Constitution that I know so many of my friends just slept through, didn't realize that something so significant was about to be placed in our Constitution. So, I mean, that whole amendment process, it certainly goes both ways, and we really have to be diligent as citizens to, we just have to be mindful of those kind of ballot issues. You've got to pay attention because it can just sneak by.
Sorry to cut it short. I know, we could be here all day. I know I could be. But there's a couple things I must go over before everyone leaves. First, I want to say thank you. Thank you to both of you. Great. I appreciate it. Again, thank you to our sponsors, First Security Banking and Blackfoot Communications, as well as everyone else. And really, thank you to all of the audience for being here. There's another item of business. So as you can see when you pulled up here, there's a lot of construction going on outside. So it presents some challenges for City Club forums. So we're working on an alternative location because they're going to renovate this place. So to hopefully make it a lot better for us. But anyways, they're going to renovate. We will have another location chosen. We've been in the talks for the last 2 months on this, so I think we're right there. But please, if you don't have an email with us, please stop at the front on your way out. Make sure we have your email. We'll get you the update on there. We'll also have it on our website. If you know people that have not been here or that have been here many times that weren't here today, please let them know. Okay? Also, thank you to the Doubletree for all the accommodations they've done through all the years. We're still working through it, so, okay? Also, quickly, I want to thank our past chair, Julie Maloney. She did a phenomenal job, left some big shoes for me to fill. And also, Brett Rosenberg. So Brett's here. Brett was our chair. Even through COVID, it was brutal, but Brett did a great job. And so, Brett, I'm here to present you a piece of wood. So, okay, so there's a plaque for all your generosity and all your volunteership. So thank you very much. So with that said, have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming.